In fact, previously, people used to be paid for doing physical activity. Now people have to pay for doing physical activity by paying for gym membership. So we need to build healthier cities with less pollution, with opportunity for more pleasurable and safe physical activity, have tobacco-free spaces, and particularly ensure that our children are growing up healthy, because childhood obesity is becoming a major problem in India. And even obesity, if you're really looking at it, the latest NFHS 5, the National Family Health Survey 5, in adults in India reported that 24% of the adults in India were obese, overweight or obese, even by the conventional standards. Leave aside the waist-height ratio. And 19% in rural areas and 33% in urban areas. And just to give you a figure, when my former colleagues in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, along with people in Chennai, conducted a major diabetes study, but not just diabetes, pre-diabetes, what's called dysglycemia. Other indicators of pre-diabetes also combined with diabetes. In Delhi, among adults above age of 20 years, 72% of men and 73% of women were found to have dysglycemia, or unacceptable glucose levels, diabetes or pre-diabetes. So that is the kind of catastrophe that we're walking into. Plus, of course, in terms of stress-related issues, there is a challenge about increasing stress in modern life. Stress is actually a protective phenomenon to some extent, because we do need a certain amount of stress, particularly when there are emergencies. Acute stress is required. If you're walking on the street and suddenly a DTC bus rushes at you, you can't say, "Ki farak panda," right? So there is a certain amount of stress that saves you. You have to jump up and protect yourself. So stress is protective. But too much of stress, particularly chronic stress, and particularly situations where you have very little control of how to manage the stress, that actually continues to create inflammation, erode the organs of your body, especially blood vessels, and create atherosclerosis as well as rupture soft plaques. So in terms of stress, just remember this. Stress is like a musical string instrument. If your strings are too lax, they don't make good music. If your strings are too taut, they don't make good music. So just the right amount of stress is what is optimal for us. So I think there are a number of ways in which Indians can protect themselves in very many ways. But some of the things that we must recognize is that even when we are talking about blood tests or blood pressure or blood glucose, any of these, we do recognize that most of them operate in a moderate band, neither too low or too high. And it is important for us to maintain that moderation, even in terms of physical exercise, etc. And then we will be able to avoid the heart attacks. But indeed, heart attacks are rising in this country, and they're affecting people across all social classes, in all parts of India. Both genders are affected, and therefore it's absolutely important for us to prevent the heart attacks as well as we can by creating conditions where we can make and maintain healthy living habits, but also following certain simple rules by which we can protect our hearts. Thank you very much. So any questions? I'll be happy to take some questions.
Aman there from News18 India. Yeah.
Dr. Saab, we are used to having annual preventive health checkups. But after hearing you, do you think we should have more frequent health checkups, like a lipid profile, like other health checkups? And another thing I wanted to ask you, that if there is one thing that you would advise everybody to not do so that you don't get a heart attack, what should that one thing be?
Okay. You should not expose yourself to tobacco actively or passively. That's a critical element. But the second element about your health checkups, I believe that health checkups are useful, but quite often they can be misleading if they do not give you an overall evaluation. Risk is never usually predicated on a single risk factor. Of course, if you have got a very high blood pressure, 210 by 130, then of course you're in trouble because of that. But mostly it is moderate elevations of many risk factors which together create the situation of a heart attack. Slightly elevated blood glucose, slightly elevated LDL cholesterol, slightly depressed HDL cholesterol. These are the various things that combine. So it's important for you to recognize that you have to modify all of them in general. The second thing is people with even a so-called seemingly normal cholesterol can get heart attacks because it is not just the ratio of HDL to LDL that matters. In LDL itself, there is a thing called small dense LDL, which is much more atherogenic than the big buoyant LDL. And people with diabetes, people with pre-diabetes, and many Indians, unfortunately, tend to have high levels of small dense LDL fraction. And that causes a problem. Now, this is not usually measured, even in your executive checkups. Now, how does one do it? Because it's expensive. So there is a ratio of triglyceride to HDL, which ideally you should be keeping it below 3:1, preferably below 2:1, but above 3:1 sort of spells danger. So these are some of the things that you must learn to recognize. Next.
Okay, I believe we have one more question. Yes, the gentleman in the gray suit.
Yeah, I'm Major General Sanjay Soi. Thank you so much for wonderful talk. Just a couple of things. In spite of maintaining good diet, at times, and like one doesn't have diabetic, one is not high blood pressure, but still gets a lot of very high cholesterol. Is there anything hereditary to do with it? Will the DNA test help in selecting the diet?
Yes. Actually, there is a hereditary component to many of these things, but the actual genetic component explains only less than 10%, all put together. However, in some group of people, familial hypercholesterolemia, there is a very clear-cut genetic predisposition. And there are a number of drugs that have been developed now which can significantly reduce that, the PCSK9 inhibitors, which are very useful. But they also act in others with elevated cholesterol. And more importantly, now they're showing that they are having a remarkable effect in reducing the risk of heart attacks. So they're being used quite effectively for diabetes and also for dyslipidemia now. They're being used in combination. So it's being the PCSK9, particularly for familial hypercholesterolemia.
Doctor, I am Major Mohammed Ali Shah.
Just hang on. We'll just hand over the mic to you, sir.
Sure.
Yeah.
Doctor, I am Major Mohammed Ali Shah. And just not a question, just a statement that, you mentioned about earlier we would get paid to keep fit. Now we pay to keep fit. Well, in the armed forces, they pay us to keep fit, sir.
Wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I think we should motivate ourselves. But the message is that we must create conditions for pleasurable and safe physical activity in the community as well as in schools and, if possible, in work sites. That's important. We must not make it difficult for people to do physical activity.
One more here. So please wait for the mic. I request all of you to please raise your hand so that we are able to pass the mic.
Is it something to do with luck also? There's a lot of diabetic, heavy diabetes, people high on alcohol. Kushwant Singh died at 97. Biggest alcohol guy with diabetes. What a womanizer also. But the Iyengar yoga
Are you
guru,
saying it's a protective factor? Okay.
and Iyengar guru died at 88. So it has something to do with luck also, I think.
There will always be some exceptions. I go to schools to talk to school children, and they say that my grandfather smoked. Somebody gets up and says, my grandfather smoked, but he lived up to the age of 80. And this is the classical Winston Churchill example. Winston Churchill used to smoke like a chimney, but he'd lived up to 89 or whatever. So please think of traffic signals. You're not supposed to drive through a red light. If you rush through a red light, the likelihood of the probability of you getting an accident is much higher than if you stop at a red light. Of course, sometimes in Delhi, even if you stop at a red light, some car will come and bump you from behind. So some people who observe the rules also will get heart attacks, minority. Some people who do not observe the rules, early morning, hardly any traffic, you rush through a red light, you won't get an accident. Some people who do not observe rules because of combination of other factors do not get the heart attack. But they are also in a minority. For majority, the vast majority, the rules will apply. That if you have these risk behaviors and risk factors, you are likely to get much greater risk of heart attacks. But we do not know what protective factors Mr. Kushwant Singh had. Otherwise, maybe he was less stressed. Maybe he ate much healthier diet. We have no idea. So, socialization is also important. I mean, so social networks, we don't know. Anyway, but do not think that you can live like the few who are exceptions, because you may then succumb to the problem like the majority who are not exceptions.
All right, we have time for one last question. I know all of you would like to ask a lot of questions from Dr. Reddy, but one last question. We just wait for the mic, sir. The mic is reaching you. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Here this side, sir. As a father to a 4-year-old daughter who thinks that the purpose of heart is to miss Papa when he's not around, so what should I do to ensure that when she grows up, she has a healthy heart?
So basically, women are better protected against heart attacks than men, up to menopause or even some years after menopause. That's because of various hormones, female sex hormones, and their HDL cholesterol levels are generally higher than that of men. However, that protection disappears in women who smoke, women who take contraceptive pills regularly, and women who are diabetic, women who are obese. So best thing for you to tell her is to eat a good diet and be physically active, and certainly not marry a smoker.
All right, Doctor, I'd now like to take a liberty to ask a question of you. Doctor, if you allow me. Dr. Reddy.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, since you mentioned about women having less heart attacks, we've just had a recent example of an actor who's very, very fit, Sushmita Sen, and the fact that there's a lot of misinformation on social media, especially to do with the vaccines. They say people who are now vaccinated are getting early heart attacks. How does one cull all of that misinformation? And then of course, when you have celebrity cases like a Sushmita, like a Siddharth Shukla, how does one deal with it?
Well, as far as vaccines are concerned, currently there is a fair amount of work going on in the UK as well as in the US to see whether some of the vaccines they have used have been responsible for heart problems. Some of them have been responsible for myocarditis, that is inflammation of the heart muscle, not so much heart attacks as such. Even there, people who have had COVID have had a greater occurrence of myocarditis than people who have received vaccines, but definitely myocarditis is known. But it's also known that the AstraZeneca vaccine and those kind of vaccines, the virus vector vaccines, also in some cases, again a small minority of cases, have resulted in venous and arterial thrombosis, so they can form clots. So some association is there, but in general, people who are vaccinated have much better health outcomes than people who are not vaccinated. Now, as far as some of the celebrities are concerned, I do not know the specifics of the lady you're mentioning, I think that's the lady you're hinting at. But I do not know what all factors contributed, whether smoking was a common feature, whether there was a lot of stress. We do not know what exactly are the reasons. But in general, as I said, women premenopausally, if they do not smoke, if they're not diabetic, if they do not take oral contraceptive pills, they are much better protected than men. But after menopause, in about 5 to 10 years, that protection disappears. But also, if women are diabetic even before menopause, that protection disappears because nothing reduces HDL cholesterol or the good cholesterol like smoking and diabetes.
Okay, Dr. Reddy, I don't think they are willing to let go of you just yet. I believe there's one last question from the audience. I'd request, okay, Rakesh there has a question, yes.
Sure.
Hi, sir. So there, so many people are asking, and I also have a doubt, like we have been taking vaccines, we have taken 3 vaccines. So is that also one of the reasons to get heart attacks?
Well, this is exactly what I was mentioning, that as far as the inactivated virus vaccine is concerned, there is absolutely no risk association with clotting. Whereas the virus vector vaccines, whether it is the AstraZeneca or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, have been shown in a small number of cases to be associated with increased risk of clotting. And they may be associated with heart attacks. But there's a huge study going on in the US as well as in UK, putting all the data together to analyze whether this risk is high or not. But in general, we know that people who have had COVID during the immediate hospitalization phase or even after discharge are much more prone to blood clotting. And that's why they are advised, people who have been in intensive care or in hospital, for at least 6 weeks, they're advised anticoagulation after discharge. So the question is, are vaccines 100% safe? Probably not. Are they worse than getting COVID? Certainly not.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Dr. Reddy. Dr. Reddy, please request you to stay on the stage, and I'd like to also invite now News. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Dr. Srinath Reddy. Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy and Mr. Jyoti Kamal. That was a very, very engaging session to start day 2 of Rising India Real Heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to once again thank Dr. Reddy for being with us and taking all your questions. So I hope that you enjoyed the session. Can we have more engagement like you were all engaged and ineptly listening to what Dr. Reddy was saying? Did you enjoy the session? In rapt attention, all of you. Okay, that's quite an engaging audience. I believe you had all your questions answered. If not, then you can actually go and get in touch with Dr. Reddy backstage. Hound him. Are they allowed to do that? Dr. Reddy, I'll take his reactions slightly later, but thank you so much for being such an engaging audience. And it would be really, really lovely if we have this kind of engagement flowing in through the day, because we're talking about real heroes like Dr. Srinath Reddy, who we've just heard from. That was such a super enriching session and something that really, really matters to each one of us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our next session is with a leader who has held a range of important jobs, from the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh to the BJP President, to the Union Home Minister, and now India's Defense Minister. He holds the key to India's safety. His experience and administrative skills have ensured that millions of Indians sleep easy at night, and they are able to be very, very secure in the knowledge that terrorism is being fought and our borders are protected with a blend of intelligence,